Welcome to the DocTalks Podcast. I'm your host, Mandi Fields. I'm here to ask medical experts the questions you might have about diseases and conditions, from heart health to dementia and everything in between. Join me for a conversation where we get right to the points you need to know to navigate Canadian medicine and hospital healthcare. Hi, I'm Mandi Fields, and welcome to the DocTalks Podcast, brought to you by St. Joseph's Healthcare London. Today we're back with PatientTalks, the spinoff of our show focusing on the patient experience of the healthcare topics important to our listeners. This is our final episode of PatientTalks for this season, and the fourth in a series discussing breast cancer. Today, we are joined by Kellie Chouinard to discuss survivorship, both from a long-term health and wellness perspective and on adjusting to life after treatment is over. Kellie is a writer, teacher, and PhD candidate based in Waterloo, Ontario. She spends most of her time thinking about stories, how we tell them, who we tell them to, and what they do in the world. Her current research explores young adult life, writing about illness and vulnerability, with a focus on collaborative stories about breast cancer. Outside of research and teaching, Kellie loves spending time in nature, making art, and taking slow photo walks, preferably with a latte in hand. She has a soft spot for secondhand bookstores and regularly falls in love with strangers' pets on the internet. Thank you for joining me today, Kellie.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I've got to ask, what's your favorite of all secondhand bookstores? Which one is it?
Oh, I used to live in Calgary, Alberta, and there was a very large chain of used bookstores that were enormous and you could get lost in them. And I'm blanking on the name right now, unfortunately, but it was such a great store, and there was one really close to me, so I would go like every week.
Well, if you make it to London sometime, check out City Lights Books. Have you checked it out?
Yeah, when I lived in London, I went there often.
Yeah, no, I can't believe it's still there. Lots of treasures in there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So really appreciate you joining us today talking about survivorship. So I'm wondering, Kellie, do you want to start at the beginning, share a little bit about your breast cancer journey, and how did you end up today? You're the fourth conversation we're having with breast cancer survivors.
Well, I was diagnosed in November 2019 when I was 34, and it was kind of, I think it's unexpected for everybody. It doesn't matter how old you are when you're diagnosed, but I happened to be working as a freelance editor at the time, and I was editing somebody's nursing thesis, their master's thesis, about the rising rates of triple-negative breast cancer in Canadian women in their 30s, which is oddly very, very specific. And I had no idea what triple-negative breast cancer was. I didn't really know much about breast cancer. And I'm reading this document, and I started to recognize things that were happening in my own body, and kind of instinctively grabbed my breast and felt this lump. And I just remember being so shocked that I leapt out of my chair, and, it's like everything that you would see on TV. It was so unexpected. And so I finally made myself do a breast self-exam, which I hadn't done in about 10 years, I guess, at that point, and felt this lump. And so I went to see my doctor, and it ended up being breast cancer, as much as I tried to convince everybody in my life, no, I'll be fine. It's not going to be that. It's going to be completely benign. I'm 34. And so, yeah, I was diagnosed.
Well, so then to today, do you identify with the word survivorship?
I didn't for a long time. When I was in treatment, I met a lot of people who were also in treatment, and their disease progressed, and they were eventually diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, or had been diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer from the beginning. And so a lot of the people that I knew died or were dealing with things that I wasn't dealing with. And I thought, I don't really identify with this idea of survivorship, this term of being a survivor, because it didn't feel really accurate to kind of the experience that I had had. It felt really dismissive to me. I'm studying the stories that we tell about breast cancer. So I spend a lot of time reading about it. And something that I read really struck me about a year ago, which is that this idea of survivorship and the term survivor, it didn't always used to mean what we think it means now. And so we tend to think that it means something celebratory. It's very individual. We talk about survivorship as surviving against the odds or surviving against the statistics. We don't really spend a lot of time thinking about or talking about the people who make up those statistics, whose deaths kind of built those odds. We talk about survivorship as something to celebrate, and that didn't feel accurate to me. And so anyway, about a year ago, I read something about how it used to be a communal term. And so it was a poet in the 1620s named John Donne who wrote about his experience of grief and loss and illness. And what he wrote was that survivorship was about community, and it was about being part of a community. And so when one person in that community dies, what John Donne felt was something that felt a lot like grief. And that's kind of how I look at it now. This term survivorship and kind of being a survivor, it's not because I did something special that other people didn't do. To me, it's an acknowledgement that I belong to a community, and it's a community that's marked by a lot of death and a lot of grief. And that's what it means to me. So I do kind of use it now. I will sometimes refer to myself as a survivor. I talk about survivorship, but I talk about it as a way of acknowledging some of the grief and acknowledging that there is still a lot of loss. And that's part of being a survivor, I think, is learning how to hold that loss.
I find this really interesting, and I'm thinking of some other things right now, but what I'm curious about is, and I can tell you're a writer just by the way you speak, it's like almost like a poetry in your language that you use. It's quite riveting. Is there a marker when you were diagnosed in 2019 when you were cancer-free? Is that language you identify with? And then when you say, from this day forward, I now belong to this community of survivorship.
Yeah. Everybody that I know who's been through cancer has kind of a different date that they'll mark as the date that they consider themselves cancer-free. For me, it was the date that I ended my treatment with having bilateral mastectomies. And that to me is the date that I think, yeah, I was cancer-free at that point. I had gone through chemotherapy. The pathology that came back after the mastectomy was clear. I was fine. And so for me, that's the date. It was in June 2020. And so I kind of still celebrate that date every year. Celebrate, not in a birthday way, I guess is the word that's coming to my mind. And that's not what I mean, but I mark it as almost like a rebirth day for me.
That's beautiful. I celebrate in much the same way that you just said when I'm 6 years and 7 months sober. And so on my soberversary, right? It's not like a birthday, but it's something really, really important to acknowledge and hold on to and protect. For me, it's about protecting. So curious, so do you protect your health and wellness and the people you allow around you because you know how sacred and you can't take it for granted, your health?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think all the time, but especially, around those anniversary dates. So for me, the date of diagnosis is one that it's still really hard for me. And I found myself in the first couple of years kind of backing away from people and just wanting to be alone. And that wasn't helpful because I ended up spending the entire day crying and not really doing anything to kind of make myself feel any better or acknowledge why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And so I do kind of different things now, a little bit more about movement and art and things that kind of make me feel like a whole person. And it's kind of the same for me around the rebirth dates, around the date that I consider myself cancer-free. So this year in June, my mom and I went camping, and it was just, it was like me and my mom, and we spent the whole day sitting at Georgian Bay, and she was painting and I was writing, and it felt like such a great moment and such a great day. And I was so glad I got to spend it with my mom. Was
your mom with you throughout your whole journey?
Yes and no. And the no part was my own doing. She really wanted to be, and she was such a great support. I lived in London at the time, and my mom lived in Windsor, which is where I was from. And she would bring me groceries, and she would come up for all of my appointments and talk to me about treatment options. And she did all this research about kind of the best foods to make for somebody going through chemo. And I mean, all of it was incredibly helpful, but I was so stubborn in my need to not look at it. I just kind of wanted to put my head down and ignore what was happening and just get through it. And I think there was a big part of me that felt like if I let my mom be part of this with me, it's real. It's not something that I can undo. It will have really happened. I don't think I was willing to have that. I wasn't willing to sit with that. And so I pushed her away a lot more than I would like to admit.
You were so young, though. Had anyone else in your family been diagnosed with cancer or a life-threatening illness?
Oh, there's a long history of cancer in my family, but not my immediate family. So one of my paternal aunts had breast cancer, but didn't tell anyone in the family. So I had no idea until after I had been diagnosed. And the same, my paternal grandmother had colon cancer, but I was so young when that happened. I didn't have any immediate memories of what the experience would be like. And my parents had, thank God, have never had cancer. My siblings have never had cancer, thank God. And yeah, I was My mom really, really wanted to be there, and I understand, but I was very adamant. I didn't know we weren't having that.
How did you eventually let her in?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was that I was in treatment during the pandemic, and not being able to have my mom there kind of changed my perspective. So it wasn't a case of she was showing up at my house, she was coming to help me, and I was pushing her away. It was more she couldn't be there. And I realized I kind of wanted her to be there, that it did make it easier. And it took me a long time to admit that that was actually the case. And I'm sure she will tell you, no, that I would never tell her that that was the case. And I don't think I have, even to this point. But yeah, it was, I think the not being able to have anybody was what made me realize I really wanted somebody there. And I wanted my mom to be there in a way that I was not willing to admit. And I can admit it now. And I'm really glad I have a really close relationship with my mom. And we do a lot of things. We go on a lot of adventures, and it always feels to me like I'm trying to make up for the time that I pushed her away by inviting her to do more things with me now. And we laugh a lot, and we have such a good relationship. And I mean, it's weird to say it, but I don't think that that would have been the case if I hadn't been going through treatment during the pandemic. If it had been the year before the pandemic and my mom was there all the time, I don't know that my perspective might have changed as much, or at least as quickly as it did.
It sounds like, we don't know what we have until it's gone.
Yeah.
And, a world pandemic. I can't imagine going through what you were going through during the pandemic. That's a whole set of when you hear about people complaining about the pandemic and not going to grocery stores. Did you ever just say, come sit down? Let me tell you a story. Have you ever had that moment, Kellie?
I have. Oh, I have. So for me, it was when I went back to school. It was about a year or so after I finished treatment. I went back and started my PhD. And I remember in one of the very first classes that I had, and we were still online at the time. And so I'm like sitting in my apartment, and we're, all the little Zoom windows. And I'm listening to all of these other new, like first year grad students talk about their experience of having gone through school during the pandemic. And I was having this like massive anxiety attack sitting there listening to this conversation. And it ended up becoming kind of my whole final project for that class. I like made a video and talked about what it was like being surrounded by conversations that didn't really acknowledge what had happened or the stakes of what was happening. So I can imagine it would have been really difficult to be in school at the time. But for me, my focus was I still have to go into the hospital on a weekly basis. And is there even enough PPE? Are there the right protocols? Am I going to get sick? Am I going to give it to somebody? If I get sick, what's going to happen? Like that it compounded a lot of the anxieties of having cancer. And so it was weird to be in an environment where other people had a different experience.
Oh, I bet. I honestly couldn't even imagine that. Kudos to you. And so then you wrote about it. You created something from it. Is that part of your healing?
It is, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I first started back at school, I didn't want to tell anybody that I had had cancer. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to be the same type of grad student that I was 15 years ago when I did my MA. And so I was like trying to ignore this whole thing that had happened to me. And finally, I told my advisor, and I told a couple of my friends in the program, and I started using it. I think my experience with cancer started to become part of the work that I was doing in grad school. And I hadn't really intended to make it part of my research, part of my courses. I mean, I always intended when I started this program, my intention was always to study kind of the ways that we tell stories about living with cancer. But I didn't plan on talking about my own experience. That didn't really feel like something that had a place in academic writing. And now I'm like completely the opposite side of that perspective. I think it has to be part of the story that I tell in my research. How can it not? This is how I know some of the things that I know, or this is how I know why we tell some of the stories that we tell, because it was my experience, or, because I made friends who had a different experience than I had going through cancer. And so their story is a little bit different, and it does shape a lot of the work that I do. But even when I was doing my coursework in the first couple of years of the program, I did a lot of art-based projects where I could process what I had been through. So I made a digital scrapbook at one point, and I presented about that at a number of conferences at this point, because it was so helpful for me to be able to put these things together in a different way.
One of my questions about the survivorship for you, this community. So do you actually belong to like a support group, or are there other people who've been diagnosed with different cancers? Or I'm just curious about that in terms of what survivorship, and I know that is the theme of today's episode, and how it's, survivorship and who you are. What's your new normal now? So I know there's a couple of things thrown in there, but I'm just curious about first the community. Do you belong to an actual community of people?
Do I belong to an actual community of people? I'm going to say yes, with the caveat that it's not a community that I can say, we meet at this place. But it's not like through an organization or, some kind of classical support group. But my community is a lot of the people that I've met on social media, on Instagram in particular. And I think Instagram is quite popular with people in my age group, which is why a lot of us gravitate to that platform. And it really surprised me at first when I was in treatment, the number of people, the number of young women in my age group who were posting selfies as they were going through chemo treatment or posting selfies after surgery. And I thought, I can't do that. I don't think that's for me. And then I started doing it and interacting with these other women, and we've become each other's support group, I think. And so that's become a really good space for me. But I also connected, and it was before I was diagnosed, I became quite good friends with somebody who I met in London. And so she still lives in London. And she is also a cancer survivor, 20 years this year. But she had Hodgkin's lymphoma when she was younger. And I think the whole time I was in treatment, she was like my one-person support group that I could ask her anything without really being embarrassed or feeling awkward about asking. I mean, sometimes I would ask her like for her embarrassing experiences when she was in treatment, and that made me feel better. It made me feel like everything I was experiencing was normal. And we still kind of have that relationship. And I think a lot of it is because we had a friendship before I was diagnosed. So that was something that I could refer back to. But it's still, she's still somebody that I can ask.
Sounds like she really validated you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And she still does.
Those people are gold, aren't they?
They are.
So, Kellie, in terms of getting back to normal, does that sentence even mean anything? Or is it like life before and life after cancer and what it looks like now for you?
For me, it's very much a life before and life after. I tried, I think the first little while after I was diagnosed and after I finished treatment, I tried really hard there were two things that I tried really hard to do. One of them was to be a completely different person. Like that felt like the expectation that I had built for myself. You'll come out the other side and you'll be different and you'll be better and you'll be stronger. And it's like, okay, when does that happen? And it didn't. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go back to being exactly who I was before. And I couldn't be that person either. It was like cancer hadn't changed me completely, but it changed enough things that there was no going back for me, which was, kind of how I ended up saying, you only live once. I always wanted a PhD. I always wanted to teach post-secondary. Now's the time, and just start, not really from scratch because it wasn't starting from scratch, but build something new. And the quote that I always share with everybody when I talk about life after cancer is, it's from the TV show Murphy Brown, which I loved when I was a kid. And I think I watched it obsessively. And apparently all of these Murphy Brown quotes still live in my head. And towards the end of the show's run, the 10th season, Murphy Brown has breast cancer and she goes to a support group. And one of the women that she meets in this support group says to her, most people only have one life. But we have two. We have the life before we're diagnosed where we're, going along and we're buying boots and complaining about traffic on the Beltway. And then there's the life after we're diagnosed when we realize we only have one life. And that has stayed with me for, whenever that show went off the air, I think it was in the 90s, I've held on to this line and it didn't mean anything until after I was diagnosed. And I realized, you only get one life. And some people after treatment can rebuild what they had before. And so it is kind of a going back in a different way, but it is kind of a going back to the same goals and the same life and the same experiences that they had before that they wanted to have. And that's great. And I love to see my friends do that. I love to see them rebuilding what they had before. And I couldn't do that. And so my focus became building something new. And I've been a lot happier.
What's the most exciting thing like for you? And it doesn't have to be big or anything, but just for you that you, in this new moment, your health that you built for yourself, not going backwards, but moving forward, that you could share. And I wish people could see your face because I am looking at a face of someone with peace. You have peace, don't you?
I do. And I feel like that's actually that's it. That's for me. That's the most exciting part is I have a lot of anxiety and I'm stressed a lot and it's a lot of, grad student stress, but I'm happy and I'm mostly feel like I'm at peace and I get to do something I love. And that's really exciting to me is I do get to teach now as part of the program that I'm in. And so I've been teaching for the last couple of years and it's the highlight of my week, every week that I get to talk to university students about social media or about storytelling or whatever it is that I'm teaching. I get so excited about it. And it's just, I love it. It's my favorite thing.
I wish you were my teacher. You probably put a whole lot into your lectures, don't you?
I do. I have so much fun with them. I think my students sometimes come to my classes and think, oh God, she's going to go crazy today. And I'm like, have all these activities that we do and bring out all the colorful whiteboard markers. And I have so much fun with it.
That is awesome. Kellie, I only have a few more questions, but is there anything that you'd like to touch on? I want to ask you a question about staying in touch with your healthcare providers. What does that look like for you? Do you still do that? So I'm curious about that, but I really want to know, is there something that you want our listeners to know about on the other side of treatment, survivorship, and creating a life, that you want, knowing that you only do have one life to live?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Something that I think is important to talk about is, being willing to ask for help. Was something I couldn't do in the first couple of years. And so I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot with my mental health. I struggled a lot with survivor's guilt. And it always felt like, it's been too long. I've been out of treatment for so many years. I should be over this. I should have moved on. And I felt like I hadn't. And so it took me a long time to be willing to ask for help and go look for supports and believe it when somebody told me that some of what I was feeling was my brain was lying to me. In survivor's guilt, a lot of times your brain tells you that you're not living well enough, you're not living the right way, you're not grateful enough for your own survival, and that maybe I'm here because somebody isn't, and that's a heavy thing to live with. It took me a long time to believe that's my brain lying to me, and to be able to ask for help and look for support. And so I think the thing that I think is important for anybody who's gone through cancer or gone through something traumatic or gone through really anything that's life-changing is you don't get over it. And there's no magical, mystical time when you're going to be okay, or you're going to feel like you're exactly who you were before, or you don't need help. You don't need to talk about it. I think for a lot of us, we do need to talk about it. We do need support, regardless of whether it's been 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. I think for some of us, it's always still there that need to deal with it.
Thank you. And I want to stay centered on what you're talking about and not go in the ditch about what survivor's guilt can mean to people where they're not experiencing cancer treatment and seeing what that loss looks like. I worked at Wellspring Cancer Support Center for 4 years, so I'm familiar. My mother died of leukemia. She was 46. I was 17. And so there's, even with my youngest sibling, who was 13 when our mother passed, I was 17. Just that piece, there were so many more things I learned, so many more tools I got from my mom that he never got.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still look after him. Like, my brother just turned 50, and survivor's guilt is a weird thing.
It is. And I think it affects us all a little bit differently, and, comes from a variety of things. It's, not just from cancer, but a lot of different types of loss and a lot of different types of grief can produce the same feelings. So
what about working with your healthcare providers?
I was so lucky that I had an amazing breast surgeon. She's fantastic. It's Dr. Sarah Knowles.
Oh, that's who I worked with.
Oh, she's amazing.
Isn't she the best?
She's so lovely. She just, when I first met her, I was so anxious the first meeting, and she put me right at ease, and she was so pleasant and so easy to talk to and so empathetic. And so it made it really easy for me to talk to her, that she understood a lot of what I was going through at the age that I was. But she was also just like the sweetest. I remember for the first surgery that I had, and I'm lying on this table having a little panic attack, and she just held my hand and let me cry. And it was like that stayed with me. That was such a moment of care and empathy. And, I hadn't had an experience like that with another healthcare provider. So I do still see her. I mean, I think medically there's no, I don't have mammograms. I had bilateral mastectomy. So there's no imaging that I have, on a yearly basis, but I do still see her. And sometimes it just feels like a social, how are you? What's new? But that's kept me feeling like, okay, there's still somebody looking after me. You don't have to be so worried all the time. And that's what I needed, is kind of just have that feeling that there is a safety net.
Somebody that you trust to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Something so intimate, your breasts, life-threatening, cancer. I mean, that's a double whammy, no pun intended. It's massive. And that you can trust her and your whole healthcare team. That it's really important.
It is. Yeah. She's just a blessing. She is absolutely in the right field.
I always like to make her laugh. I mean, I use humor in general for anything, but when I'm going through something scary, I like to use humor. And so I would by myself, like, oh, I'm thinking about jokes. And like, what she'd say, remove your shirt and then take off your bra. And then I'm like, normally someone takes me out for dinner. They ask me to do this. And I would be so like focused on making her laugh. I'd forget about the questions I should be asking about this lumpectomy that's coming up but that's just me using my defense mechanisms to get through something scary.
I do the same thing. For me, it's like I will come out with like either funny quotes, and a lot of Murphy Brown quotes, or random facts were the other thing that I would pull out instead of dealing with something serious that I should be dealing with. I had this brain full of random facts about things, usually designed to make somebody laugh. And I'm pretty sure I did it to her quite often.
I love it. Kellie, what advice or insight would you give people who are just finishing treatment?
So one of the things that I remember reading about was, that the story that we're told I think most of us have heard the story even before we're diagnosed, but the story that we're told is that somebody is diagnosed and they go through treatment and then they either live or they die. And if they live, they're heroic and they're applauded and they are grateful and they're a better person. And that's not the whole story. And it's not the story that you should measure yourself against. I mean, some days, absolutely, you will be grateful. And some days your brain will lie to you and it will tell you that you're not grateful enough. You're not living well enough. You're not doing enough with your life. Or that you're here because somebody isn't, that it's a trade-off, right? That somebody lives because somebody dies. And that's not how it works. So I guess my advice is just to recognize that that's normal. That's part of survivor's guilt. That's part of survivorship, is sitting with these uncomfortable feelings and understanding that it's something we all feel. We all, I think, need to be reminded sometimes that whatever you're feeling is the normal thing that you need to be feeling right now.
You don't have to beat yourself up.
You don't have to beat yourself up.
It's your first time going through something like this. So how can you possibly know?
Exactly. And also that it's not necessarily something that you need to change. So if you're feeling really sad or you're feeling a lot of grief, feel it. You don't have to not look at it. You don't have to feel grateful all of the time. That's exhausting. I think it's normal to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel like you've lost something. But not to feel that way all of the time, right? So to know when to ask for help, to know when you're feeling this more than what feels right for you.
Thank you for joining us today, Kellie, and for sharing your story with our listeners. This was the final episode of the Patient Talks Breast Cancer series, and I'd like to thank all the individuals who have been brave and vulnerable in sharing their stories with us. I highly recommend you listen to the first 3 episodes of the series if you haven't already. Join us next week for another episode of the DocTalks Podcast, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at St. Joseph's London. Until then, stay healthy.